Thanks for having me. Thanks for that introduction. Hello, my name is Jane. I am from, Montreal. I live in Montreal, but I work in Ottawa, so I go back and forth all the time. And it's really a pleasure to be here. Manitoba is my favorite province in Canada. I really, really love Manitoba, and I love Winnipeg. And so, any excuse that I can have to come and visit, I'm always happy to. And I'm happy to be with you today and exchange and learn together and all of that stuff. So I'll be talking about food and farming and the people who do that seed saving and that farming work here in Canada, around the world, the approach that we take at USC Canada in the work that we do around the world, and I guess some of my reflections on life and work and food and all of these things. I want to acknowledge Kenton Loby, who's here, who I think many of you know, who is on the USC Canada Board of Directors. So he's my boss. And we're going to be in dialogue, I think, at the end for questions and comments and stuff like that. But also I've invited Kenton, if he's got a burning comment to make at some point as I'm going through, to please not hesitate. Yeah, exactly. Like not hesitate to interrupt. And if you guys have, there will be time at the end for questions and comments and all of those things. But if there's something that comes up over the course of the presentation, and you just want to ask a clarifying question, or there's something burning or whatever, please don't hesitate. Okay. So I was told that by Kenton that folks appreciate a fulsome introduction to myself. It's not something that I do very regularly, but just to kind of introduce you to who I am and where I come from. So these are my grandparents. On your left are my Bubby and Zeta, Pal and Bessie. My Zeta was from Romania and came to Canada in 1927. My Bubby was from Poland and came to Canada as a young girl in 1915. And then my Oma and Opa on the right, Heini and Zofie, came from London. So they were from Germany, but then went to London. They came to Canada with my dad in 1954. And I have a Jewish background. All four of my grandparents were secular, left-leaning Jews with very strong social justice values. And I grew up kind of, in that context. Oy. So that's Zeta. That's my grandfather by the river. This is from an email I got from my mom the other day when I was asking about when did, my history and when my grandparents came and all of that stuff. And she says they were bright, funny, politically active people, and they knew how to have a good time in the river. And so that's my Zeta by the Credit River. And my grandparents on my mother's side were part of, a social movement just outside of Toronto that founded a summer camp, like a day camp called Camp Nijvelt. And it was a Jewish, secular, left-leaning day camp. A lot of people who had a union background, who worked in, they called it, like the needle trade. In Montreal, we call it the shmata business, so I guess like textile factories and stuff like that. And my Zeta was a foreman in a textile factory, and they came together to purchase this land collectively and live together collectively. And I guess, we're very engaged people. They were very active in the peace movement. So Pete Seeger came through. I don't know if you guys, know Pete. Yeah. So, Pete Seeger played at Camp Nijvelt. Woody Guthrie played at Camp Nijvelt. Both my parents went to Camp Nijvelt and actually had land adjacent to Camp Nijvelt where I grew up. So the tradition continues. So that's me skipping stones with my dad on the same kind of river, and that's my mom and my sister by the side. So anyway, that's a little bit about where I come from. And I think some of where my leanings come from in terms of the work that I do today. Okay, on to something completely different. So apart from USC Canada, I would say the most significant formative experience that I've had in my career was at an organization called Cilantro Popula. And Cilantro Popula is a Meals on Wheels organization based in Montreal. So it's an organization that delivers, that prepares and delivers meals to seniors and people living with a loss of autonomy. These are an example of some of the meals that we prepare. I worked at Cilantro Popula for about 10 years. I started as a volunteer, then I was an intern, then I was volunteer coordinator, then I ran the rooftop garden program, then I was executive director for my last 5 years there. I sat on the board, and I'm now a monthly donor. What's unique about Cilantro Popula is that it's youth run. So it's a youth run, volunteer driven Meals on Wheels in downtown Montreal. And most of the meals are delivered by bike. To 10 neighborhoods around the city. And it's 100 volunteers a day who come in to prepare, pack, and deliver meals 5 days a week. So 500 volunteers a week, delivering about 100, 125 meals a day to people all over the city. And as I think it's 10 routes, 8 of those are done by bike, and 2 of them are done by car. So you guys can relate to this. The biking is so all year round, 5 days a week. These intrepid volunteers are going out and delivering meals to folks at home. So one of the things I think that is so special about Cilantro Popula is that, obviously it's emergency food provision. It's delivering meals at home to people who need the service, but the approach is to see the Meals on Wheels not as the end point, but as the beginning for a relationship between young people and seniors who don't often have the chance to interact in the city. And so this moment of the meal delivery, you could think of it as the objective. It's like, okay, yes, the meal has been delivered, check, but actually it's just the beginning of a transformative experience that can happen for both people, for the person on the receiving end and also the person on the delivery end. So it flips the notion of service provision. Who's really benefiting from this interaction the most? Is it the person who is receiving the meal, or is it the person who is delivering the meal? In my experience, it's actually the person delivering. How many young people have a chance to interact on a regular basis with seniors in the city? How calming is it to sit with a grandparent and hear stories and share what's going on in your life? How transformative can it be as a young person to think, this is what I could do for a career? This kind of interaction, this kind of relationship, I could spend my life doing this. Like, that's amazing. So, when you think about social service, a lot of you think about the service provider and the beneficiary. But in reality, and I think it's not just at Cilantro Popula, the greater benefit is experienced by the person who is delivering the service. And so it also makes you think about dignity. Like dignity in the context of being a person in need. That person is actually giving a lot more to the person who is providing the service. And I think that's just a truth. So beautiful relationships form through the Meals on Wheels. So there's the weekly meal delivery, but there are also we do like a Christmas brunch. There's outings to the Sugar Shack. We do a Valentine's Day event. All of these like different events over the course of the year to bring people together and to kind of celebrate intergenerational relationships in the city. And it's an organization, one of the things that I love the most about, and what I learned the most at Cilantro Popula is that it's an organization that kind of has a spirit of why not? Delivering meals by bike, why not? Having a youth-run organization, why not? Linking young people and seniors together in the city in new ways, why not? And so there's a whole bunch of different ideas and creative projects that emerge at Cilantro Popula. It's a very innovative space. And in my last, my last kind of gesture at the Roulant was to instigate and lead a project to buy and renovate a new building for the organization, because we were working in a space, we had outgrown our space. It wasn't accessible for people who have mobility issues, and we kind of dreamed of a place where the full food cycle could be lived out. So a place where you would be doing food production, you would be transforming that food, you would be having like a bike shop for the delivery and sending it out, like, and also waste cycling. So the full kind of expression of the food cycle in the city kind of personified in a space. And when we were imagining that project as staff and board, we had a volunteer who kind of sketched out for us, you know, this is maybe what it could look like. And this is what we did. So I mean, I think you know, having this spirit of why not and why wouldn't we, you know, can really lead to incredible things. It now has a peri-urban farm, so the food production happens in a green roof on the building, a rooftop garden on the building, and also a peri-urban farm. There's a downtown market. There's a women and trans bike collective. And so I guess the story that, you know, as you guys are learning and thinking about, you know, what do you want to do with your career and how do you want to live your life, for me, the big lesson about Cilantro Popula is, again, the idea that the transaction oftentimes is how people think of, is like this is the end point. So for Meals on Wheels, the transaction is the goal. It's the service delivery. But actually the transaction is the beginning point of a relationship that can form, that can be mutually transformative. And then we can also start thinking about transforming food production, food distribution, waste management, the way that people get around in a city. So it can be extremely powerful, and in my view, the heart of it is the relationship. And that's what I learned in my tenure at Cilantro Popula, and it has had a profound impact on the way I approach my life and the way I approach my work. Any questions about the Roulant? If you're in Montreal, you should drop in for a visit, and you could do a meal delivery. Okay, we're going to talk about seed. Moving along. So there are some people who received a little card. Can those people stand up? Okay. We're going to do a little introduction to why seed is important. You are all plants. And we're going to walk through a growing season together, okay? So imagine this is like a typical growing season. This is our biodiversity game. I have not done this many times before, so has anyone here played the biodiversity game before? One person, okay. I noticed I did not put up my hand. So we're all going through this together. Okay, so basically what we're going to do is we're going to go through a growing season and we're going to see who makes it to harvest. So look at your card. So we're going through the growing season. The seed's been planted. It's germinated. The sprout has come up. The plant is growing. Uh-oh, a drought has set in. Okay, there's a drought. You're thirsty. But some of you, amazing, brilliant varieties, have experienced drought conditions before. And as you went from seed to plant to seed, you adapted by producing deep roots and needing less water. Okay, so if you have adapted in this way, you've got your deep roots, you're able to bring the water from deep in the soil up into the plant and survive the drought, you can make it. If you don't have a tree on your card, so if you have a tree on your card, it means you've got those deep roots. If you don't have a tree on your card, please sit down. Okay, sorry guys, maybe next time. The season goes on, everything's going well, uh-oh, aphids. Aphids are coming, they're attacking the crops. Unless you are aphid resistant. If you don't have a bug on your card, sit down. If you have a bug on your card, you're aphid resistant, well done. You produce some kind of something that repels them and keeps them away, you're able to survive. So you survived the drought, you survived the aphid. Now we're getting ready, we're getting at the end of the season, we're almost ready to harvest, but there's an early frost. Winter hits early, but some of you, amazing varieties, are frost resistant. You're hardy, you've been through a cold winter before, you survived, the brilliant farmer saw that, saved the seeds, kept them, planted you again next year, you're frost resistant. If you do not have a snowflake, you're not frost resistant. Please sit down. Okay, only a few plants left standing in the field. We're almost at the end. Oops, strong winds. Middle of the night. All of the plants without a hurricane symbol, you flop to the ground in the strong wind and you got to sit down. Okay, so these are the folks who are left standing at the end of the season. Let's all give them a round of applause. I mean, that's just kind of an introduction to why genetic diversity in the field is important. And that's one of the kind of core premises of the work of USC Canada. Does anybody know what this is?
It's like a seed vault in Norway or something? I don't know what country. What is it?
Yeah. This is Svalbard. This is the seed vault in Norway. A lot of people call it the Doomsday Vault. So it's a seed bank that has samples from national seed banks from all over the world that keeps them in a deep freeze. That's kind of like a snapshot of biodiversity at a certain time of year. And the idea is if terrible things happen, the seeds are saved in Svalbard and we can access them in times of crisis. The first seeds were actually pulled out of Svalbard a couple of years ago because of the crisis in Syria, and the gene bank in Syria was no longer accessible. And so, but they had sent samples to Svalbard, and so researchers pulled the samples out of Svalbard, were able to keep working with those varieties, and then sent the samples back in. So it's a very important part of preserving genetic diversity globally. And as I say, so this is kind of like the doomsday seed vault, but it's connected to a network of seed banks all over the world. But this is also a gene bank. A farmer's field is also a gene bank. This is a gene bank. This is a community seed bank in Safo, Mali, and all of these are amazing local varieties of sorghum that have been saved. And so some of those varieties are drought resistant, have a certain kind of drought resistance. Some of those varieties have a certain kind of disease resistance. Some of them are short maturing, some of them are long maturing, and all of those varieties are being saved in the community seed bank in Safo. And so when I meet people on the street and they say, "Hey, what do you do?" and I say, "Oh, I work on seed," immediately they think of Svalbard. Most people start talking, they either start talking to me about Svalbard or about Monsanto. But I think it's really important when we're talking about seed and we're talking about seed banking is to think about a farmer's field as a seed bank. And the difference between a farmer's field and Svalbard is that in the field, the crops are always adapting. So if you think about the intelligence and the learning capacity of a crop, right? And we just went through this exercise of a typical or an atypical growing season. The plants that are able to survive are adapting to conditions as they change over time. And so when farmers save those seeds and replant them the next year, we have a production practice and we have a farming system that is adapting to changing conditions over time. The Svalbard style of gene banking is called ex situ, or like off-site gene banking. The farmer's field gene banking is called in situ, or on-farm, on-site gene banking. And that's the form of diversity conservation that USC Canada really works on. So when we think about a gene bank curator, we might think about a guy in like a white lab coat. But these are the curators of the gene banks where we work. And those are the farmers. So we think about how the plant evolves over time, but the farmer is also working with the plant and evolving over time, and the farmer is evolving their production practices over time. And so we think about kind of a dynamic system of coevolution of the natural environment, the plants themselves, and the farming practices all kind of evolving together. So these are the curators that we work with around the world. These are also curators of gene banks, and I want to say that and these are examples from across Canada. So USC Canada works in 12 countries around the world. One of those countries where we work is here in Canada. This is Shannon Jones, who's a farmer in New Brunswick, and she's saving the seeds. She's growing a pepper crop for seed here. This is Brian, who's in Leaf Rapids, Manitoba. And he's working here in a field of locally adapted strawberries. There's an incredible diversity of northern adapted strawberries here in Manitoba. It's really amazing, and he's growing a whole bunch of those varieties. And these are 3 seed interns at Everdale Farm in Ontario. So there are a lot of farms across Canada and gardens across Canada where diversity is being grown out and adapted and saved. And I think it's important to acknowledge that work and support it, and we're very excited about it. So the beginning of our work on seed, so USC Canada is an organization that has been around for a very long time. We were founded in 1945 by a woman named Lada Hitchmanova, who was a refugee from Czechoslovakia, who came to Canada, and she founded USC to work in communities and help rebuild communities in post-war Europe. So that was our focus at the beginning. We evolved over time. And our work on seed and biodiversity actually started in Ethiopia. So Malaku, who's still around and still involved in our program, at that time was the director of Ethiopia's National Gene Bank. And in the 80s, during the famine, he was traveling the countryside, and he saw farmers eating their seeds. And we can think of like the harvest of a crop in a year, like that's the food for today. Saving the seed is the food for tomorrow. So if you've got farmers eating the seed, like that's they're eating that's the potential of next year's harvest. And so he realized how critical saving seeds is to the future of the food supply. And so it was kind of I don't know how groundbreaking it sounds now, but at the time, a very groundbreaking approach for a director of a national gene bank, like a very formal institution, to say, the key to resilience in communities over the long term is in the seed, and it's in the seed in those communities with the knowledge of farmers. So you've got a guy from a very a formal scientific kind of training who's saying, you know what, we need to be paying attention to what's going on in the field, and we need to be respecting the wisdom and the knowledge in the field. And so he, together with USC Canada and another colleague, Pat Mooney at Etc. Group, started the program Seeds of Survival, which 10 years ago USC Canada kind of adopted as our only program. So we were doing a number of different activities in communities around the world, and now for the last 10 years our focus has been exclusively seed, biodiversity, sustainable farming practices, and the rights of farmers who are growing those that food and saving those seeds. And it all started in Ethiopia in the 80s. Okay. So when you combine farmer knowledge with local diversity, what do you get? You get climate resilience. So this is a potato field in Bolivia. And we can see that, in this photo, we've got one part of the field that's doing really well. We've got another part of the field that's not doing so well. Any guess as to what's going on here?
Disease on the right side.
Other guess? So this is a field that basically experienced something that like in this game that we just went through. So disease would be one example. In this case, it was a frost. So it was an early frost that came. And the variety that's planted over here was an imported variety. And this is a locally adapted variety. So this is the variety that local farmers developed, that local farmers had adapted over time, that's adapted to these conditions, and that was able to withstand the early frost. The imported variety that they had planted that year, where everyone said, "Oh, this is an amazing, this is an improved variety, right? Like this is the variety, this is the seed. You know, we're gonna get you on this program. It's going to be fantastic." The early frost came, and it didn't make it. So, I mean, there are two lessons here. One is the importance of local adaptation and farmer knowledge. The second is having diversity in the field. So when you have diversity in the field, you've got that genetics that is able to withstand different kind of things that that get thrown at you by Mother Nature, and then that's going to be happening more and more and more. So our thing is diversity in the field is kind of like an insurance policy in the face of climate change. And similar to how you would think about investment, or this is Terry, a farmer we work with here, was saying the other day that when he started thinking about this stuff, the expression "don't put all your eggs in one basket" really took on a whole new meaning. So that's kind of so climate resilience, livelihood security. So diversity in the field gives you more assurance that you're going to have a harvest. We work with farmers. This is Terry. This is here in Manitoba. But if going back to the example from Mali, so we saw the community seed bank with a whole bunch of different varieties of sorghum, some that are short maturing, some that are longer maturing. So let's say you have you've got a given year. You start with your favorite variety. You plant it, and it's a long maturing variety, whatever. But it doesn't germinate. Let's say you've got a really, really dry spring, or something happens, and and that first crop that you've planted fails. Okay, you've got another variety in your seed bank. It's the same crop, but it's a shorter maturing crop. You plant that, you still have a chance of a harvest. Let's say that fails. Then you go to another crop. So okay, it's not going to be sorghum this year. Maybe I can do rice, or I don't know. Maybe I can do something else. You've got another crop. So maintaining the diversity in the field, but also maintaining access to different crops and different varieties in the seed bank, in the local community seed bank, gives you a higher chance of a harvest and more livelihood security. So either what you're eating at home or what you're bringing to market. Nutritional diversity. When you go, I guarantee you that photo that I showed of the hands holding the potatoes, the community members who grow those different varieties of potatoes are going to tell you different uses for each of those potatoes, different seasons when each of them are grown, different dishes that you prepare with each of them that all bring nutritional diversity to their family. So with biodiversity in the field, you have nutritional diversity on your plate. And again, that's across crops. So we want to be eating a lot of different kinds of crops, but also within crops. Like there's an amazing diversity of potatoes out there. There's amazing diversity of bananas, and that all have really different nutritional varieties. And when you have that kind of diversity, you've got more nutritional diversity in your home. These are women. So this is Lucy, who maintains the seed bank in Sappho, and these are women who have started a collective in that community, growing out the traditional foods and preparing traditional dishes and bringing that back, that kind of bringing those traditions back into the community, because they've been lost a little bit. And food sovereignty. So one component that we haven't discussed yet, which is of critical importance, is the whole question of agency. So the agency to be making decisions about how you farm, what you eat, and what you feed your family. And that is a huge fight that's happening around the world right now, is the question of agency and who's deciding. And the heart of agency, when we think about our food supply, is seed. So the power to save seed, the power to maintain your own seed collection, to choose what varieties you grow, to be able to save the seed at the end of the season and replant it the next year, that's the heart of That's at the heart of food sovereignty. And people around the world, including here in Canada, are fighting for the right to save seed and fighting for their agency in their own food choices and in their own lives. And in some cases, it's a connection to human rights, and in some cases, the people who are defending their right to save seed and their right to food sovereignty are putting themselves in incredible positions of risk. Okay, what's happening with biodiversity around the world? This is we have all of the diversity that's ever been created by farmers. That would be the best case scenario. 75% of agricultural biodiversity has gone extinct over the last 100 years. It's pretty alarming. So when we're talking about biodiversity, I've just made a case for why biodiversity is so important and how biodiversity is at the heart of food security and food sovereignty around the world. The situation that we're facing right now is basically a mass extinction. Like, we're in the midst of a mass extinction of agricultural biodiversity. So 75% of agricultural biodiversity has gone extinct over the last 100 years, and only a fraction of the remaining 25% is actually available, is accessible. So a lot of the diversity that remains is tied up in gene banks, and that's not super useful for farmers. So really, if we're talking about diversity at the heart of food security, of resilience to climate change, all of these things, we've lost an incredible amount of diversity over the last 100 years, and we have amazing restrictions on access to the diversity that remains. So it's not a good situation. Okay. So I don't know. Interesting. So in that situation, in that scenario, where we've lost a huge amount of biodiversity, we continue to lose biodiversity, and we're facing increasing restrictions on access to the biodiversity that remains. Who should we turn to for solutions? Okay, let's look at history. Traditionally, who has bred the crops that we eat around the world? So peasants or farmers have bred 2.1 million varieties of 7,000 domesticated plant species and contributed those genetics to our food security, but also to research. Commercial breeders work with about 137 crops, and about 50% of R&D dollars go just into maize. I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this one because there's a line now, and this is very much alive in agriculture in Canada today, that says, in order to innovate and in order to breed new varieties and give people access to new varieties, we need to be able to attract private investment in research and development, because it's those private companies that are going to do this innovative research and create this new diversity, and that's going to be the future of our food supply. Well, the reality is that as research has become increasingly privatized over the last 50 years, we have lost an incredible amount of agricultural biodiversity, and farmers are facing increasing restrictions to access to the biodiversity that remains. So anyway, it's not a good it's not an argument that's based on fact. So if I'm thinking about the amazing amount of biodiversity that we've lost over the last 100 years, and I'm thinking about, well, where do I want to put my investment in bringing diversity back, I'm going to go with the farmers. I don't know about you, but I'm going, my bet's on the farmers. Okay, who actually feeds the world? So that's another argument that we hear all the time. We need this kind of agriculture. How do you feed 9 billion? Right? And we need industrial agriculture in order to feed 9 billion. We need to up our yields. Well, in reality, family farmers still feed over 70% of the planet with less than 25% of resources. So it's like land, water, energy, all of that stuff. The industrial food chain uses at least 70% of the resources and feeds less than 30% of the people. So again, where do you want to? Where would you put your money? Where would you put your investment? When we're looking at biodiversity loss and we're looking at food security challenges, personally, again, my money's on the farmer. So then how do we bring diversity back? How do we support these farmers? Where do we go from here? These are some steps that I think are important. Number one, make farmer seed systems visible. So one of the challenges is the role that farmers play in plant breeding, the contributions that farmers have made in terms of breeding varieties and making that diversity available is not at all recognized. And so we need to, the reality is farmers are the stewards of the food supply, farmers are the stewards of the seed supply, farmers are researchers, farmers are the original plant breeders, farmers are still breeding, farmers are still saving seed and circulating seed, and we need to make those seed systems visible. We need to respect their knowledge and leadership. That's what we aim to do in our programs. Get the diversity back in farmers' hands. So farmers know, who knows what to do with seeds? Farmers know what to do with seeds. So this is actually a farmer and a researcher working on a chickpea crop in Thunder Bay. So we want to get seeds back in farmers' hands, co-create programs to conserve diversity, adapt and create diversity. Again, I use a lot of Canadian examples because I worked for a long time on the Canadian field program. So these are two researchers actually in Quebec. And so the model that we have at USC Canada when we're talking about participatory research is the farmer, the researcher, and an animator. So we play the role of animator working together. So bridging knowledge systems, farmers and researchers working together on farm to breed new diversity, to breed for local environments, to breed for organic production or low input production. So, and when I say it's not create programs, it's co-create. So it's the researchers, it's the farmers, it's the NGOs working together to build programs to conserve diversity, to adapt diversity in the field, so to grow out the crops, we say save the best, eat the rest, so see how well crops do over the course of the season, save the seeds of the best plants, so you keep those plants and you keep crops evolving and adapting to climate change, and to breed new diversity. So farmers and researchers working together, we run a national, here in Canada, participatory plant breeding program, farmers and researchers working together to breed new varieties of potatoes, maize, wheat and oats. We support similar work in Honduras, around the world. So for me, when I look at those two, pies of, wow, we have lost an incredible amount of biodiversity, I actually don't feel that sad, because I know that we can always create new diversity. And when you think about the 2.1 million varieties of crops that farmers have already bred, there's so much we can do if we get seeds in farmers' hands and we work together to conserve that diversity, adapt it, and then also breed new diversity. Build awareness. So we're doing it a little bit here today, but some of the times, this is a critique that I have of us at USC Canada. When we talk about seed, we get really technical really fast. There's a lot of awareness now that's been built about the importance of local food, sustainable farming, all of that stuff. But how much do you guys hear about seed? Not a huge amount. You hear a lot about local food, you hear a lot about sustainable food, organic, stuff like that, but the seed that grows that food, not so much. And so finding ways to bridge the gap so that people understand why diversity is important, understand how it is at the heart of our food supply, understand what's at stake in terms of farmers maintaining agency and control over their seed and food is really important. So this is from a campaign that we did a couple years ago at USC Canada, and we're going to try to do more of it, so building public awareness about the importance of these issues, which then helps us build influence. And so I took this picture this past fall in Rome at the Committee on World Food Security of the UN. USC Canada works in the field with farmers, but then all the way up to policy interventions at national, regional, and international levels, trying to build influence, and which then feeds that back down into the work on the field. So talking about saving seed, talking about agroecology, talking about participatory research, all of that stuff at all different levels. And we do that at USC Canada, but the farmers we work with do that as well, and the partners we work with do that as well. So they are in these rooms defending their rights and talking about why what they do is so important and merits investment. So in terms of influence, again, I'll just give a Canadian example. So organic agriculture in Canada accounts for about 2.5% of the market, and it's the fastest growing segment of agri-food in Canada, but it receives 0.2% of R&D funding in Canada. And so, how do we expect varieties for organic production to compete when we're not investing in developing those varieties at all? So what are we what's doing well? Well, what are we investing in? And so again, just some of the arguments that we're trying to bring forward to build the case for more investment in this kind of work. I wanted to talk briefly about governance using two domestic examples. The heart of food sovereignty is agency and choice, and people having agency and making decisions about the things that affect their lives. When we work in international cooperation, who makes decisions and who's sitting around the table and where influence lies is really, really important. Governance is really important. I don't know how much you guys talk about it in your classes, but there's a whole trend right now around collective impact. I'm involved in 2 collective impact projects right now here in Canada. The first is here in Manitoba. It's the Northern Manitoba Food, Culture and Community Collaborative. It is kind of a collaboration of Canadian funders wanting to support Indigenous-led work on food sovereignty in Northern Manitoba. It is kind of convened by Tides Canada, and the governance structure is really deliberate. So there's community leadership, there's community voice around the table, helping define, well, what are going to be the monitoring and evaluation systems? What's the theory of change? How do we help people in philanthropy learn about how to properly engage in communities in Northern Manitoba? Community members are around the table in terms of decision making, and there's an emphasis on relationship and shared learning, reciprocity, respect, etc. I think it's a really wonderful model where you've got folks from the South, mostly non-Indigenous people who want to be in solidarity with Indigenous leadership on food sovereignty and recognize that we don't know how to do that properly and recognize that we need to be led in order to do that properly. And this program has provided a framework for that. There's obviously always issues, but the intention is fantastic, and so far it's working really well. Another collective impact project that I'm involved with is called the Collective Impact Project in Montreal. It's an initiative of the United Way of Greater Montreal. It's about poverty reduction in the city. There's a number of philanthropic foundations sitting around the table, convened by Centraide, and it's about tackling poverty at a neighborhood level. Sitting around the governance table, there's about 20 groups represented and only 1 community voice. And that's been the case from the beginning. And for the last 3 years, every single time we've sat around the table as a board of directors or a steering committee and had a conversation, I've been saying this conversation is incomplete. We do not have the wisdom in the room in order to make an effective decision here. And at a minimum, we're missing an opportunity. And further along, we're putting ourselves at risk of not achieving our objectives, and we may also be causing harm. And so, when you're thinking about interventions, when you're thinking about your own role, when you're thinking about how projects are set up, it's really important to think about who's around the table in conceiving programs, who's around the table in running those programs, in evaluating the programs, and who ultimately has agency and who ultimately is involved in decision making. I think that's it. So more information, this is USC Canada's website. This is the website for a Canadian program. And if you want to, voice your support, you can use I am a seed saver with the hashtag.